Welcome into episode number 4 of the Bird and the Bear podcast. Michael Knauff, Cameron Carriglio. After a pretty exciting week 2, we're looking ahead for week 3. Not as good of a slate this weekend, but it's hard to live up to what week 2 had in store for us, Cameron. I mean, obviously LSU, Texas, that kind of highlighted the weekend.
Yeah, this is actually the first week since 2017 without two ranked teams facing each other. Interesting little tidbit. LSU Texas was interesting. We didn't really see the first half too terribly much, but the second half was fantastic. And honestly, both teams left some points on the board by deciding not to kick on 4th and goal. I was shocked by Joe Burrow. I figured he'd probably break 250, 300, somewhere in there, but no one has thrown for that much since Rohan Davey in 2001 for LSU. It was just kind of the antithesis of their grinded-out field position style of play we're so used to seeing from them, and it's honestly pretty exciting, except for the fact we have to play them.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, all week, I've heard LSU, are they the best team in the country, at least offensively? I mean, Burrow, 9 touchdowns, 749 yards, and the most impressive stat of all, probably, an 82% completion percentage for Joe Burrow to this point, and Texas is not like the scrubs on defense. They have athletes back there, and he shredded them all game long, and it was showed on that last touchdown of Justin Jefferson, when he, 3rd and 6, steps up in the blitz and delivers one for 60 plus that clinched the game for him.
And conversely, they got shredded as well,
which is very un-LSU-like.
Very un-LSU-like. I think Sam Ehlinger is a potential Heisman candidate. He may not win, but I think he'll potentially be invited. I wouldn't think it would be too far out of left field to say they probably have a top 3 offense. Clemson hasn't shown me the variety that I think they will eventually get to, but in the first 2 games, Lawrence has looked a little rusty. I think Bama than them, which is so weird to say. That is so strange.
And the weirdest thing is, you go back to 2011 with the LSU-Alabama 9-6 game, and now you fast forward to now, we're looking at, probably potentially 30-plus points for each team when they play in November, which is something that, if you had told me that even 2 years ago, I would have told you were crazy.
Yeah. I'd say it's those 2 in Oklahoma are the 3 right now that look just unbeatable offensively.
It's basically a track meet when those teams step on the field. And always that highlighted the weekend with LSU getting that 45-38 win. They're now 4th in the AP poll. A lot of people thought they should be 3rd. They should have jumped Georgia.
Could make the argument. Georgia
really isn't. They haven't played anybody really. No. Vanderbilt and Murray State, and LSU a good win over Georgia Southern, who is a quality Power 5 team out of the Sun Belt.
10-win team last year, and
they beat them by 40 plus. And then Texas, they go into Austin and hang 45 on what people consider to be a pretty stout defense.
Yeah, top 25 Big defense, I would say.
And then obviously Texas A&M Clemson was the other big matchup.
Boring.
Incredibly boring.
Really boring.
I feel like Texas A&M had the ball the entire first quarter and a half.
I just kind of gravitated towards Colorado and Nebraska in the same time slot. That was a lot more entertaining of a game. Clemson's a machine, even when they don't play particularly well, and I feel like they really haven't each of these first 2 games. I mean, they blew out G-Tech and handled A&M pretty easily, and A&M's a good team. Whether that reflects on their record this year, because that schedule is just ridiculously brutal, kind of remains to be seen. But I never felt for a second like that game was in doubt.
No,
from the opening kickoff onward.
And Texas A&M they couldn't generate any offense. I mean, I think at one point Mond was like 5 for 13 passing, and he just struggled a lot, and he just didn't look comfortable like he did last year in College Station against Clemson. And that's one thing that's really impressed me so far about Clemson, not necessarily the offense, but how well they've played on defense and how much they've been able to replace the talent that was lost from a year ago.
Replace and improve. I mean, Mond hung up 430 on them last year. I mean, some of that was kind of desperation time, but still, that's a ton of yards. Jake Bentley lit him up, 5'10". And I feel like this year that may not happen against anyone. I just don't see it. I think they're almost playing a little bit like an old school Bama right now, where they're just playing more physically and winning that way. And then Lawrence, he's elite. He will get going. I mean, he has 3 picks in 2 games. I don't expect that trend to keep up. That's a scary, scary, scary offense, coupled with a scary defense.
And you throw Travis Etienne in there, who has been a monster through 2 games to this point, and
I'm not sure they're beatable again.
At least in conference play, the Texas A&M game was the only game left on their schedule where they had less than an 80% chance to win. And the rest of their games this season, it's at least 82 or 83% chance, according to FPI, for Clemson to win. And we expect them to go to Syracuse in the Carrier Dome and probably shred a Syracuse team that had pretty lofty preseason hopes. But yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the 2 other games really that kind of stood out for the weekend, you kind of touched on a little bit already, the Colorado-Nebraska contest. What happened to Nebraska? You're up 17-0 on the road. You seem like you have control, and then Steven Montez and Colorado just come right back and they take it in overtime.
Well, you don't see flea flickers work very often anymore, much less go for a 96-yard touchdown. But obviously that was, I think, the big turning point of the game when he got that to Katie Nixon. And Nebraska's defense just didn't really show up in the second half. I mean, it was 17-0 at halftime. And Nebraska did get a little bit conservative, but they still scored 14 second-half points, and that should have been enough, especially after they got that 75-yard screen pass. I think put them up 31-24.
Right.
And I think that the difference between Mike McIntyre and Mel Tucker, I think Mel Tucker is a better coach, especially as a head coach. McIntyre is a very good defensive coordinator. That's been established. But aside from that 1 year where he rode Sefo Lufau and Philip Lindsay to the Pac-12 title, they underachieved every year. I mean, they started 5-0 last year and lost their last 7. That doesn't happen very often. I don't see them losing games like they did at Oregon State last year, where they blew, 28-0 lead or something.
Oh, it was a massive lead.
To a horrific team.
To the worst team in the Pac-12, yeah.
I think Nebraska should never have been ranked, coming off a 4-8 season. I just don't understand that. I know it's like the Scott Frost year 2 magic, but the Big Ten's a little different than the AAC. And I'm impressed by Colorado more than I'm unimpressed by Nebraska. That was just gutsy.
I am too. Like, you come back like that at home, and you're able to compete with a team that arguably may have had just the most pure talent on the roster in the Big Ten, or at least the Big Ten West.
Probably the West, yeah.
For sure. And you hang 50+ on an in-state rival, and then a historical rival you come back on and you win. Now you're 2-0, and I agree. I'm pretty impressed by Colorado to this point.
To be fair, Colorado did essentially the same exact thing last year because they came back on Nebraska and won with like 5 seconds left in the fourth quarter. But this Colorado team is a little bit different feel. I think they do make a bowl this year. How about Steven Montez, though? 379.
He's been incredible through the first 2 games, and he's kind of the engine for that offense. And the other game that kind of stood out was everyone was rooting for Army over Michigan last Saturday, and I feel, was it for that red zone interception by Army quarterback Kellen Thompson? Hopkins. I think Army takes that game. I mean,
yeah, that would have put them firmly in control, especially considering that they were averaging 6 or 7 minutes of possession. Michigan maybe gets one unhurried possession and one where they'd have to hurry up. As much as I loved watching that game and wanting Army to pull it off, that is an inexcusable pick. You cannot throw that ball. I know you're triple option, you throw like 40, 50 times a year, but you have to know you, A, shouldn't make that throw, and B, probably can't make that throw. Just get rid of it. Get sacked. Do something that isn't that. There was no one in the area. If he doesn't do that, I feel like it was a panic moment where he was really intent on just getting that score, getting up 2 scores, and putting the game away, ostensibly. He doesn't throw that. If that's a tie game, I don't think he throws that. And that killed him. That and him having no pocket presence and getting strip sacked to end the game.
And on that turnover, Michigan, that's when they went down and tied the game. So you got to think, he throws it away, they get a field goal, 17-7. You don't give Michigan that momentum. I don't think Michigan comes back and wins. I don't think they can score twice.
That offense is not explosive enough. Unless something miraculous happened where they somehow broke off a 78-yard touchdown. I don't see it. I think it speaks to how poor their offense actually is still. I don't know. I feel like it's almost like a Muschamp situation right now where Harbaugh can hire whatever offensive coordinator he wants, but he's going to still have control. I mean, you can't hire a QB genius from Alabama and not let him have the reins to the offense. You got to let Gaddis run his game, and I feel like he's not doing that. We've seen Shea Patterson at Ole Miss. He was a gunslinger, and this looks like the same Michigan offense.
It looks like no difference from last year or the year before last.
None.
And if I think if Michigan continues to be this anemic offensively,
Bye Harbaugh.
And this is the second last or the last year of his contract.
I think it's the last. I'm not sure though.
So basically, this is a renewal year for him, and I think if they go 9-3,
I think that Michigan team we just saw is at least a 4-game loser this year.
they have to go. So they have Ohio State, obviously. They have to go to Penn State this year. They have Notre Dame still on their schedule, and I believe then they play Wisconsin too. So
Wisconsin is a machine right now. Side note,
and they have to go to Wisconsin this year.
Yeah.
So yeah, okay, that's 4 games right there. I don't know if Michigan will lose all 4 of them, but that's 4 losable games.
Yeah, which is more than I would have said they would do last year, and that ended up being the case. But yeah, that was surprising, especially after Army did not look good against Rice.
Yeah, I mean defensively Army's legit, and they typically are.
Yeah, I predict Army doesn't lose again. I think they go 11-1.
I would agree. I think that they're stout enough defensively, and that they're not gonna play a defense like Michigan every week, and they move the ball at times effectively, and like you said, I don't think they're gonna lose another game just because you can't defend a triple option, especially when you don't have the athletes like Michigan does to compensate for that. So after 2 weeks, two and a half, you want to count week 0, there's some storylines developing a little bit. The SEC as a whole kind of seemed to regain its footing last week after kind of a rocky week 1, with the exception being Tennessee, who
I want to go on a mini rant.
inexcusably lost to BYU. You can take the reins here, Cameron.
So this speaks to coaching more than anything else. I hate the prevent. Just as a general rule, I hate when teams do it. You're basically asking somebody to drive down the field on you and probably score. However, when there's like a 3rd and 16 and you have BYU stuck at their 12-yard line?
They are inside their own 20.
Run the damn prevent! What happened, you cannot let happen under any circumstances. Put a damn punt returner back there. You can't let that happen. How do you let a wide receiver split a safety and a corner and go for 64 yards and set up the game-tying field goal? That's just bad coaching. That's bad scheming. What was that? I mean, if that happened here, I think Grantham's gone. Or at least run out of town, or people would be
pitchforking his
house. I mean, that is unbelievably bad schematically. And that's all I have to say about that game. Tennessee had no business losing, and that's kind of the trend.
They didn't. They were up by 10 at one point. They
had firm control of that game for most of the game. I mean, you subtract that last little drive where it was about 70 yards, they only had, in the overtimes, they only had like 240 yards of offense, BYU did. They finished with 339 with 2 huge pass plays and 2 OTs.
And maybe, and in theory, you think that Tennessee can get back on track this week playing Chattanooga, but
it wouldn't shock me if they either. I don't think they'll cover. I think they'll win, but I didn't think they'd lose to BYU, so I really don't know. Chattanooga tends to have a decent team most of the time.
At this point, that might be one of 2 more winnable games on Tennessee's schedule.
Vandy, who they never seem to beat.
We'll see at that point. And aside from the SEC, obviously LSU wins. Texas A&M, they're not there yet. I think if you give A&M a year, then they can really potentially contend for the West. But at this point, obviously, it's kind of a 2-horse race between LSU and Alabama. But Auburn defensively, obviously elite. Offensively, Bo Nix still needs to develop.
Tulane's a very good team.
Yeah, I guess I was just about to say
they're probably a 9-win team.
Tulane is excellent defensively, especially
a hell of a coach. So that doesn't shock me that score was low like that. They played. I like the way they play, and I think Auburn just covering in that game. I think that's fine.
You'll take it.
Yeah, I think that's fine.
And then on the east side, Georgia obviously railroads Murray State. Florida gets the job again against UT Martin, despite losing Kadarius Toney now for a couple weeks. And C.J. Henderson is doubtful for Florida this coming week. but it doesn't look like it's going to be anything serious. I doubt he'll play simply because Kentucky, outside of Lynn Bowden, doesn't have the weapons to challenge the Florida secondary, so you just put Marco Wilson's basically just going to shift over there. And so Florida took care of business. Kentucky, despite losing Terry Wilson, they've handled their first two opponents in Toledo and Eastern Michigan, but losing Terry Wilson really hurts, and that I think that takes Kentucky from a potential 9-win team to 6 or 7.
I don't know. I liked what I saw at Sawyer Smith at Troy. Very efficient. I mean, he was under Neil Brown, so he knows kind of how to run that air raid scheme. And before Terry Wilson, Kentucky threw the ball quite a bit under Stoops. I don't think this is going to be that big of a change schematically for them, simply because they've run it before. And he played pretty well against Eastern Michigan. Granted, Eastern Michigan did allow a bunch of pass yards to Coastal Carolina, who runs like a fucking wing T. So I think it'll still be tight. But I mean, we'll get there. But
yeah, we'll discuss that.
Worried.
We'll discuss that matchup a little bit further down in the broadcast. Missouri really bounced back against West Virginia. Their defense looked like the defense we thought that Missouri would have.
Or maybe West Virginia's offense is just that bad.
There's that possibility also exists. That's for sure.
But, South Carolina put 72.
It was nice to see Helinski really have a nice first performance. It was him when he threw his first touchdown. I think that meant the world to him and his parents. That was awesome. Moving out west, the Pac-12 now has become quite the conundrum, with Washington losing by a point and poorly to Cal. Stanford gets trounced by USC. I mean, Oregon obviously already has a loss. Washington State hasn't played anybody yet. They're 2-0. The Pac-12 North is way up in the air right now, and between those four teams, I feel, and you could just blindfold throw darts, and you could hit one. You could make an argument that they'll win the North.
Yeah, I don't understand that conference. Like, I don't really consider them Power 5 anymore. First of all, that Washington-Cal game was just weird. It started at 10:30 Pacific because of a lightning delay. It ended at about 4:30 Eastern.
That's rough. Being a player and having to sit after warm-ups that long.
Oh yeah, most of the time they just call the game, and they probably should have tried to make it up on Sunday. But logistically, I'm sure that's harder than it sounds. That knocks Washington out of the race. I think you have to be undefeated in the Pac-12 to get to the playoff, unless you're Oregon, just because they lost to an SEC team. And speaking of Oregon, they beat a fairly decent Nevada team that just beat Purdue 77-6.
And Justin Herbert looked like the Justin Herbert that we thought that he was going to be. When
you throw the ball downfield, you score more. Who would have thought?
What a concept.
Yeah, I don't know. Stanford, I think, is in for a long year.
I think there's a 6 or 7 win team this year.
They got manhandled by a true freshman, and that's a defense that normally doesn't give up a whole lot of ground.
Yeah, and USC ran the ball all over them. Malapai had 3 touchdowns.
Keaton Slovis was averaging almost an 11 attempt as a true freshman. I mean, he was really impressive. I watched that entire game. The play calling was outstanding. I think even if Clay Helton gets the axe this year, I think Harrell gets promoted. I love their play calling. Very spaced out. I like USC, actually, in the South.
I'm saying that brings me to my next point regarding the South. Can USC contend with Utah? And would you throw Colorado in there maybe too, or
no, not yet?
So you think that USC could challenge Utah though as the only other team to maybe get the South?
Yeah, I mean, I like Colorado and I like what Mel Tucker's already doing there, but they did this last year, and they did this year before, so it's kind of hard for me to pin them as contenders already. I mean, who knows? The Pac-12, it's always madness recently, so who knows? It could be. But I think USC could contend. I don't know though. I think Utah is pretty much the class of that division. I like Utah, Washington State right now, assuming that Washington State can actually win the Apple Cup,
which is kind of their bugaboo at this point.
Yeah, it's like Virginia v. Tech, except they lose way more dominantly most of the time.
And Utah, back to Utah, USC, they play not this week but the following week, so that'll be kind of an early test for both teams. Yeah. And then the following week, Utah has Washington State. So So the road's not easy for Utah the next 2 out of the next 3 weeks. So they'll be tested for sure, and we'll kind of see if they really are the class of the Pac-12 after the end of September. And we're moving on to the Big Ten, and for the most part, the Big Ten is kind of clear, but a team that's kind of jumped out of nowhere is Maryland at this point. Hung 63 on a Syracuse team that in preseason projections was kind of a popular New Year's Six Bowl pick, and they ran all over the Cuse defense. And I want to ask, does that tell you more about Maryland's offense or just how bad Syracuse is?
Syracuse did just pitch a shutout against Liberty. I mean, not that says a whole lot, but they can play D. After watching that game, I didn't think Syracuse was very disciplined. I thought they were getting out of assignment. I mean, Maryland chose not to throw for 500 yards. I mean, they could have literally thrown for as many yards as they wanted at one point in that game. And they got kind of conservative in the second half. But I don't think Syracuse is a bowl team right now. But that doesn't really make that win less impressive to me. Because now that Maryland has 142 points in 2 games.
And they're averaging
It's absurd.
And they're averaging over 330 rushing yards in 2 games.
I don't know, that game was just funny to me. Good for Mike Loxley though.
I
He had
think
one of the worst head coaching stints in history in New Mexico.
And I just think, regarding Maryland, maybe not this year. They play in the Big Ten East, so it's a gauntlet for them. But they could definitely be a sleeper over the next couple of years that could just spoil some seasons, get an 8-4 record here and there.
Yeah.
And this year might be a year they could do it.
I think a bowl is definitely doable.
Absolutely.
The Big 12, aside from the elites, there's always that middle grouping of teams that comprises most of the conference. Like the middle 8, I would say, that on any given year will beat each other. So they could win 3 more games, they could win 7 more games. Who knows?
And for Maryland, aside from playing Penn State in 2 weeks, it doesn't really get tough for them until the last 4 games of the season. So for them to reach bowl eligibility, they have to do it in the early half of the season. I mean, they go to Temple this week, and they host Penn State, which is their first real test of the year. And then it's Rutgers, Purdue, Indiana, Minnesota. Those are 4 very winnable games, and I think by that point, Maryland has to hope to be bowl eligible because it's Michigan, Ohio State, Nebraska, Michigan State.
I think they get 4 out of that, and then I think they beat Michigan State. But, I mean, long way to go. Who knows? But as it stands right now, I think they beat Michigan State.
So you're saying 7-5, 8-4 for Maryland this year?
7-5, 8-4.
And for Maryland, in first-year head coach, you take that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
especially with the turmoil that program's been in for over a year now.
Yeah, and it's good to see them kind of rebound.
Yeah.
And then we're going to move to a Group of 5 conference, and I've been very impressed with the Mountain West conference at this point. 2-1 again against Power 5 teams this past weekend, and that one loss was Fresno State in overtime to Minnesota.
And that was 5 inches away from being a game-winning touchdown. Thrilling ending to that game, actually. And then, I mean, Boise State had an ugly but good win over a pretty good Marshall team.
Marshall team,
Marshall
yeah.
probably wins 8-9 games this year. Is very well coached. Doc Holliday is a great coach. I don't know. I mean, can you really consider Oregon State Power 5 at this point? And I watched pretty much the entirety of that Hawaii game, and that was an impossibly ugly game. I mean, Jonathan Smith, they were tied at 28 at this point. There's about 6 minutes left, I think. He decides to run a fake punt from his own 34, while his defense was actually playing really well in the second half of this game. Should have punted. Runs a fake punt, throwing with his punter, who has never thrown a pass before. Of course, he airmails it. And Hawaii gets like 14 yards and kicks a field goal. That's the rest of the scoring. Oregon State loses. I mean, Hawaii played about as poorly as they could and won. Not a good game to watch.
Not at all.
It was on Facebook, so that there was like a chat room, and it was very funny.
And, I mean, Hawaii's now, obviously it's against Arizona and Oregon State, so you can read into that what you will, but they're 2-0 now against the Pac-12, and they have another Pac-12 game this weekend.
Which I think they finally lose.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that a bit later.
Ain't bad.
Yeah, you take that if you're Hawaii. But Utah State bounced back with a big win. And like I said, I thought that the Mountain West had been thoroughly impressive to this point.
I agree.
So we're going to move on now to this week. And before we kind of get into the games and predicting them, we're going to go to our Cameron's Hot Take segment. Cameron is 0-1 now on the season. His first hot take was in the second episode. It was kind of a general one. He thought that Alabama would lose 2 games this season. And I'm going to give you a chance, Cameron. You can either double down on that or you can recant that statement.
I'm recanting.
You're going to recant that statement? I'm going to say after...
That's a stupid statement.
You were trying to be a little ballsy there.
Silly.
But you are 0-1 because you had Texas beating LSU.
Yeah, I went against my gut on that one. It was close, though, relatively.
There were moments where I thought that...
I mean, Texas damn near covered that onside kick with about 20 seconds left.
It was an excellent onside kick.
It was actually a really nice effort by, I think it was Duvernay, actually.
Yeah. And then if they don't drop that touchdown in the end zone on their first 4th and goal of the game, then, it's a whole different ball game. But, so you're 0-1 right now on the year, and I don't know if you have a hot take for this week or not.
I don't know. Let me scan the games we're looking at here. Certainly not Stanford over UCF. I don't think that happens. I'm going to say Indiana keeps it within 10 on Ohio State.
That's bold. I mean, the line for that game
Ohio State struggled with them in the past.
Indiana has put up points on Ohio State over the past few seasons. That is for sure. And if the line is 16.5, Ohio State obviously the favorite going into Bloomington. And Indiana's looked very good offensively the first 2 weeks of the season.
Yeah, very efficient. Michael Penix has been really nice. And then, they have 2 quarterbacks, essentially. If one's not good, they can just bench him and put in the guy that started for the last 2 years, Peyton Ramsey. So they haven't really played anybody, so it's hard to say. But Indiana's on their on-year, off-year schedule of getting to bowls. So I don't know. I don't think they win, but I think they keep it relatively tight, especially at home.
Yeah, I think they might give Ohio State a little bit of a run for their money, especially in the first half. And I think just Ohio State's talent kind of gets the job done. So we'll note that. So within 10.
Yeah, within 10.
So we'll move on now to the actual slate of games. And Friday has a pair of games that I think are going to be pretty entertaining.
Potentially the best games of the week.
Yeah, my thoughts exactly. So we'll start with UNC goes to Wake Forest. Both teams are 2-0. UNC had a big opening season win against South Carolina and then held off and came back and beat Miami late. So that's 2 really quality wins for UNC, and then Wake Forest beats Utah State in their opener and then dominates Rice last Thursday night or Friday night. So this game, I think it's a toss-up, and Wake's a 3-point favorite. So really pick who you want here. And
I'm going to roll with Mac Brown until it bites me. I got UNC. I think they're extremely equally matched teams. Obviously, UNC's already proven more, but I like Jamie Newman a lot. I think he's extremely talented, in that receiving core I think rivals anything you'd find in the Big 12. That being said, I feel like UNC has a little bit of magic about them.
There is some. I mean, I thought they were going to lose to Miami, and they were down late.
I mean, they could very easily be 0-2 right now. Very, very easily. Potentially should be. But Mac Magic, I don't know.
Sam Howell's the guy. Sam Howell's the guy for them, I think. I mean, He hasn't turned the ball over yet. He's got 2 touchdowns in each game.
15-24 both games. But he's already thrown for over 500 yards, so
he's been efficient.
That's efficiency.
So you got UNC.
Yep.
I'm going to take Wake Forest just because offensively what Jamie Newman's been doing with that receiving core is
impressive.
It's very impressive. Then the late game that night, number 20 Washington State heads down to Houston. Washington State 2-0. Hasn't really played anybody yet. 2 cupcake games to begin the season. Houston, however, hung 31 on Oklahoma in their opener in Norman and then rolled last week to a win. Washington State's an 8.5-point favorite, but it's in 74 is the over-under, and there's a reason for that.
Yeah. It's in Jerry World, isn't it?
Yes, they are playing in Cowboy Stadium.
Well, Houston last week, they didn't really struggle against Prairie View A&M, but they scored 31 points in the first 17 minutes and scored 6 the rest of the game. That's slightly concerning. That and the fact that Holgerson is supposedly running a high-powered passing attack, and Derek King has 302 yards through 2 games. Not per game, through 2 games.
Which is not something that we anticipated.
Not something I anticipated at all. I do sense he could definitely come out of his shell, but I'm going to take Washington State.
Yeah, with what Anthony Gordon has been able to do in 2 games, as
884 yards and 9 TDs.
And Cameron has him on his fantasy college team, so Anthony Gordon is his guy at this point. We were literally every 2 seconds he was checking to see if Gordon threw another touchdown. And
he basically was.
I was every other time you checked your phone, he was either throwing a bomb or a touchdown. And I agree. I think Washington State takes it. I think that's just too much offense for Houston to handle. And Houston, which is just a brutal slate to begin the season with Oklahoma and Washington State.
And Oklahoma essentially threw at will on them in not the same scheme, but same coaching tree.
Mm-hmm.
And they obviously struggled. And I think Washington State's going to really, really
exploit
that. Yeah, thank you. Couldn't think of the word.
So we'll move to Saturday now, and we'll begin with Ohio State, Indiana, which we talked about just previously. So Cameron has Ohio State. I have Ohio State as well. I don't think the game will be as close as Cameron thinks it will be, just because Justin Fields and J.K. Dobbins in the backfield is terrifying.
Yeah.
They shut out Cincinnati last week.
Yeah, but I don't know. I don't know how good Cincinnati actually is. Because I don't think San Diego State's very good, and they essentially beat UCLA by the same margin. UCLA might just be
bad,
really horrifically awful. Florida dodged an atomic bomb with Chip Kelly.
And that's been a huge talking point this weekend, like local sports talk radio, is how big of a bullet Florida dodged with Chip Kelly. And Gator fans should be thanking Chip Kelly for turning down the offer that Scott Strickland, the UAA gave him. And
UCLA is literally giving 4 tickets per student, or 4 tickets per season ticket holder away for free this upcoming weekend against Oklahoma.
That tells you everything you know about the state of that program.
Dumpster fire.
So move on to, on paper, not a great matchup, but historically there's definitely been some intrigue. Pitt goes to Penn State. Obviously, Pitt, not as talented as Penn State, although they are coming off with a pretty solid win over Ohio this past weekend. Penn State 2-0 on the year. They're a 17-point favorite, but Pitt, historically, they give Penn State a run for their money.
Well, last year Penn State beat them 52-6 at Pitt. Pitt's definitely gotten better, especially offensively. I think Kenny Pickett's a better quarterback than anything they've had, and that includes Nathan Peterman for, I'd say since Tyler Palco, probably 2006, 2008. But I like Penn State here to cover. I know that Sean Clifford got injured against Buffalo. I don't know what his status update is, but I think he's going to be healthy. And he's throwing for 280 each game. I think he probably eclipses that because I haven't needed him to throw for more in each of their first 2. I like Penn State to cover fairly easily. I just don't think Pittsburgh can score enough to keep up.
Yeah, offensively, despite winning last week against Ohio, they hung 20 on them.
20 to 10, yeah.
So,
and they had near 400 yards of offense, but they're not very efficient yet.
Yeah,
new OC, it'll probably take some time.
Yeah, I agree. Penn State will probably run away with this. Moving on to probably one of the bigger interconference matchups probably for this coming weekend. Kansas State goes to Mississippi State. Both teams 2-0, playing in Starkville. Mississippi State's an 8-point favorite, and Kansas State post Bill Snyder, they offensively they put points up. I mean, obviously it's against Nicholls State and Bowling Green.
Yeah,
but offensively, they look like they got some life in them now.
Yeah, I mean, last year against their FCS opponent, they played South Dakota and were dead to rights, and miraculously came back and won that game late in the fourth quarter. They scored 14 points in 4 minutes to win that game. I think this is a markedly better Kansas State team than last year. I think they make a bowl fairly easily. That being said, Miss State at home, Kylan Hill, I think their quarterback play is better than last year. So I think the positives have gotten more positive for both teams, and I think it's going to result in a similar result. Maybe a little closer than last year, but I think Miss State wins by anywhere from 10 to 13.
Mississippi State's defense is kind of the only thing that concerns me. They allowed 28
it hasn't been great so far.
Yeah, they allowed 28 to to Louisiana, and then 20 last week. 15 last week to Southern Miss. And
Southern Miss moved the ball, actually.
they did. No, that 15 is deceptive. But yeah, like you said, Kylan Hill has been on a tear. 325 yards through 2 games on the ground. And
Tommy Stevens is a good quarterback.
And he is going to be back this week. He is healthy enough to be able to play. So Mississippi State avoided a scare there when he went down with injury. So Mississippi State, like I said, 8-point favorite. And I'll agree with you, Cameron, that I think they'll cover and win by 2 scores. NC State goes to UVA. West Virginia. I don't know why I said UVA. But NC State 2-0, West Virginia 1-1. This game is supposed to be a home-and-home, but it wasn't played last year because of a hurricane. And North Carolina State this year, 6.5-point favorite. And other than name marquee, I don't know. I'm not overly entertained by this game.
I'm not either. NC State covers. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, I think West Virginia is offensively.
I think they're like a 3-9 team.
It's a big drop-off for them after the post-Greer Holgerson era. Moving on out west, Air Force goes to Colorado. The Buffs are a 4.5-point favorite. Air Force always fields pretty tenacious, gritty team. It's kind of a test for Colorado. Kind of see how they have a little bit of a hangover after that win over Nebraska. I think Colorado wins, but Air Force definitely is going to give them a run for their money.
The line seems kind of absurdly low to me. Only 4.5. Air Force didn't even go to a bowl last year. They were 5-7. Colorado covers easy money. I think they win by 21. The line's low, but I don't see that game being particularly close.
So pound that over, basically.
Yeah.
To the SEC, where preseason this matchup got a lot of hype, and I think mostly because of what happened in 2010 between these two teams. Alabama goes to South Carolina. If you don't remember, 2010, Alabama goes to South Carolina, and that South Carolina team that was loaded with NFL caliber talent beat Bama by 2 scores, coming off their national championship year. But this is obviously not a similar South Carolina team as that team was, and Alabama's a 25.5-point favorite in Columbia, and you could very easily go with the over there.
I'm going with the over. I think South Carolina could still play pretty well and lose by 30. That's just how good Bama is. I think Ryan Helinski gets a taste of reality this week. Obviously, Charleston Southern, he was going to be able to do stuff. But I don't think he's going to be nearly as effective. I think like 48-14, something like that. I hope it's close for entertainment value, but I don't see it.
Yeah, the way Alabama has been throwing the ball and their athletes in space, South Carolina just doesn't have that right now, and they might get a touchdown, to make it like it's sometime in the late in the first quarter, second quarter that could make it appear interesting, but Alabama's going to run away with this.
They'll duke it for a quarter.
Yeah,
get destroyed for 3.
So we both had Alabama and Alabama covering here. Stanford at UCF, which preseason I was very much so looking forward to this. I thought this might be UCF's kind of taste of reality, but with the way that Stanford played last week against USC, I do not believe that UCF will drop this game.
I don't either. I do think it's important that KJ Costello's back, but whether he's at full speed or fully healthy or not, obviously no one's really sure. He makes a big difference, but I think the biggest storyline here is who's UCF going to start at quarterback? They started Brandon Wimbush week 1. He wasn't particularly ineffective. He was okay. He didn't even play against FAU. They started Dylan Gabriel, who was 7 of 19 for 245. Weird stat line. And now Dario Mack's cleared. He's healthy.
That's early. A lot of people thought he would be out at least midway through the season.
Who do they go with? There's no way they're going to play all 3. Heupel gives me the vibe he's kind of a one-quarterback guy. Or else Gabriel and Wimbush would have split time against FAU. You don't just start a guy and then just start another guy, not even play your initial starter. I'm going to go ahead and say Gabriel starts. I don't think any of those guys particularly have an impact on the overall score. I'm going to say UCF here.
It's a 7.5-point line. You think they cover?
Right at. I'm going to say about 7.
7?
Sounds about right.
I would agree. I just don't think Stanford has the offense to really keep up with UCF.
Especially with the offensive variety. They can't run the ball.
Which for Stanford is kind of the most bizarre thing to say.
And it's been last year into this year they haven't been able to run the ball.
And UCF offensively is just too dynamic, I feel. And Stanford's defense has really taken a step back this season. So we both have UCF here. USC now, with kind of a test, they go on the road, they play at Brigham Young. USC obviously beat Stanford last week by 20+. They're now ranked 24th in the country. But only a 3.5-point favorite against BYU. Obviously, we talked about them, how they went to Knoxville last week. Is it a trap game for USC, or do you think they go and they handle Brigham Young?
This is the easiest over of the week for me. Even easier than Colorado. For some reason, USC, especially when you're like a true freshman quarterback, I don't feel like you really underestimate opponents. USC also went 5-7 last year. I think they're going to be hungry and are hungry. BYU should be 0-2. They shouldn't have really gotten close to beating Tennessee, frankly. And even though it's at BYU, it's not really that hostile of an environment. I mean, Utah went in and handled their business pretty easily there. I'm not sure USC is able to throw the ball like they did last week, but I think they win by at least 10.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're going to run the ball pretty effectively, and they're not going to make Slavis win the game with his arm.
I mean, even if he has to, I think he can because he was so good.
He showed it against Stanford. So moving on to another interconference matchup. Arizona State heads to Michigan State. Both teams 2-0 on the year. Michigan State squeaked by Arizona State last year.
Arizona State won.
Excuse me, yeah, Arizona State did win. As soon as I said, I was like, wait, no, that's not right. But this year, Michigan State's a 14-point favorite in Lansing. And I don't know. I think Arizona State's been very, very underwhelming. I mean, obviously last week against Sacramento State, that
was ugly.
Yeah,
that was
19 points on the FCS squad like that.
I like Michigan State here, home field advantage. I don't know if they cover, just because I know Michigan State scored 51 against Western Michigan last week, but their offense looked trash against
Utah State.
Tulsa.
Tulsa, right.
But I do think that they're going to be able to kind of suffocate Arizona State offensively. I think it's like a 24-13 kind of game. I think Michigan State wins, though.
I have Michigan State as well. So on to the matchup that where College Game Day is heading this week. Iowa goes to Iowa State in Ames. This is, like you said it, like of all weeks, it's bad if this is where College Game Day is going.
I mean, I like this rivalry a lot. It's just not really a prime time.
It's on FS1.
They always play at noon.
It's
3:30.
It's like a 4:00 FS1 game. So I don't understand how it gets that. I think it was networked wrong. I think it should at least be on Fox.
Yeah.
Instead of Arizona State, Michigan State being on Fox this week.
I agree. I am actually looking forward to this matchup. I mean, obviously Iowa State didn't look great against Northern Iowa in their 3 OT win. But I don't think that really says a whole lot about them. And they are a team that I think can hang with anybody. But Iowa's kind of their bugaboo.
They can't get over them.
They can't get over them. And I really like what I've seen out of Iowa this year. I think Nate Stanley has been fantastic.
We're throwing the ball now, actually.
Yeah. They did a little bit last year, but I think he's been more consistent so far this year. And defensively, they're top 10, top 15, I would say. I like Iowa here by about 7 to 10.
I do too. I just don't think Iowa State's going to be able to move the ball on them consistently. And Iowa has enough firepower on offense against I'd say solid Iowa State defense.
Yeah, they're not bad.
So it's 2.5 point is the line in Iowa's favor. I think they cover.
Yeah, I do too.
Moving on to the primetime slate, Florida goes to Kentucky. Both teams 2-0. Florida ranked 9th, Kentucky unranked. Florida's an 8-point favorite in this game, and you can make the argument that this game could be a nail-biter, or honestly, Florida could go in and handle Kentucky pretty easily.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the former. I mean, we've had our share of close calls with them leading up to last year, and we finally lost. And I think Kentucky's a very well-coached team. I think Stoops is probably Florida State's next head coach, if I had to put money on it. It would be great to get him out of the SEC, but too bad we would play as
continue to play him,
every year. And I feel like this Florida team hasn't proven a whole lot yet. I know they beat Miami, but, I mean, it was an ugly game. And we started pretty slow against UT Martin. So I think Florida wins here. the line seems a little high to me, especially considering last year. And I know that Terry Wilson, who terrorized us last year, is done. And that very well may give us the win, ultimately. I liked what I saw out of the offense against UT Martin. Kentucky put up 38 in both games against two MAC teams, so it's hard to gauge them, really. And defensively, they've looked a little worse than last year. They've allowed 17-24. But I don't know. I can't really pick against Florida. So
I can't either. I think Florida's going to be able to throw the ball pretty effectively against Kentucky. I mean, over 300 yards allowed through the air in both games.
No, actually, Toledo, for some reason, stopped trying to throw the ball after the first half. And then Eastern Michigan, Mike Glass threw for 337 last week for Eastern Michigan. And that's not a team that throws too terribly much.
Yeah.
But he threw 53 passes against Kentucky.
So that's like I'm saying. I think that Florida will cover, but I think it'll be like a 10-point game.
I'd take that.
And the line was 10. It's dropped by 2 full points. And like with Terry Wilson being out, and like I said it earlier, despite C.J. Henderson probably going to miss this game, I think Marco Wilson's equally as capable as covering Lynn Bowden. Yeah. And if I'm Florida, I'm most concerned about Smoke and Rose in the backfield and being able to contain them. I'm not overly impressed with Florida's run defense at this moment. I think that they are susceptible to allowing big plays.
It comes down to tackling more than anything else.
Yeah, and the linebacker spots, they're a little undersized. I mean, always the front four for Florida is, you can make the argument that they're tops in the SEC, or at least, the best 3 in the SEC, but the linebacking core is what my biggest concern defensively. So if I'm Florida, that's my only place of concern when it comes to Kentucky's offense.
I agree.
But I think Franks has a good game. I think he goes 260, 270, 2 or 3 touchdowns. You think he gets 300?
Yeah. He's due for it. He's never done it.
I didn't think so.
284 at Vandy was his career high last year.
And Florida hasn't had a 300-yard passer since
Del Rio against Kentucky in 2017.
Oh my God, he did go for 300 in that game, didn't
crushed
he?
Him. It was like 144 degrees outside.
Yeah, that was a 45-7 game. I remember being there. That was fun.
I remember the second quarter on.
I think that's how most Florida football games go. So moving on now to the ABC game. Clemson goes to Syracuse. A lot of preseason hype around this matchup because of Syracuse's history with Clemson. Obviously beat them 2 years ago and then really should have beat them last year in Death Valley, but this year a little bit different. Clemson's a 27.5-point favorite, and
Syracuse coming off a demoralizing loss. I think Clemson covers. I think Trevor Lawrence gets on track here.
I was gonna say, dude, this is a breakout game. He's gonna throw for 300 plus. I think 3 or 4 touchdowns, and T. Higgins and Justin Ross. I feel this is gonna be the games where they really get involved. Yeah, and they're gonna air it out.
Yeah, I agree.
So we have Clemson covering in this one pretty easily. Florida State goes to UVA. UVA ranked 25th in the country. We were talking before we came on here that you thought UVA should have been ranked in the preseason.
I do. Over Nebraska for sure.
And defensively, UVA is stout. They're excellent on the defensive side of the ball. And then Bryce Perkins has lived up to the billing so far in 2 games.
He seems to almost improve game by game. It's actually really impressive. He made some, it was William and Mary, but he made some dime throws against them. And then you have FSU, who it's hard to gauge them. Like, I know they won last week, but it was against a middle-of-the-road Sunbelt team. And that loss to Boise State may not end up looking too terrible. I mean, I know the way they did it was bad, but the loss itself may not look that bad by the end of the year. So I understand why the line's only 7.5. But that being said, I think UVA handles business here.
I do too. I don't think Florida State's going to be able to generate the kind of offense they did against UL Monroe, against UVA. And Cam Akers is really their only guy offensively that I feel that can make a difference for them. I mean, I know James Blackman's got some talent, but I don't think he's going to be a guy that can go out and win them a ball game if they need it.
If they can lock down Tamori and Terry, I think that will make Florida State a little more one-dimensional than they'd like to be. And I think UVA is just a better team. I think they're more talented. which is weird
That's
to say. Because even when FSU was bad last year, I felt like they were a pretty talented team. Yeah, I like UVA here.
I do too. I don't know if they'll cover. I think that Florida State's going to make it. It's going to be close throughout. I say like a 24-20 type game.
Yeah, I'm not sure UVA can really score enough to truly pull away. But I could see it being like a repeat of the Pittsburgh game. They won 30-14.
It's kind of slowly pull away through the fourth quarter, and their defense takes over. Yeah, I can see that too. We move on to a Big 12, Big 10 matchup. TCU travels to West Lafayette to battle Purdue. TCU 1-0. They had a bye last week. Purdue 1-1. Should be, for all intensive purposes, 2-0. Blew the week 1 game to Nevada, and then handled Vanderbilt. And Elijah Sindelar has put up numbers.
Yeah, Elijah
for his first few
Sindelar
games.
leads the country in passing right now.
Like under 23 or something
920.
like that.
No, yeah, you're right. I think he's like 922 or something. He turns the ball over more than I'm sure their fan base would like. But I like Purdue here. TCU only played one game against a no-one. But I'm not sure they really have a quarterback they're tied down to yet. I mean, Alex Delton showed nothing throwing the ball at Kansas State. And then they played Max Dugan quite a bit in their opening season win against Pine Bluff. So I'm not really sure who's going to start that game. And I feel like this is kind of a warm-up year for TCU. I think it's going to be similar to last year. They squeak out 6 wins. I like Purdue straight up.
I do too. I think offensively there is going to be too much for TCU to handle.
And TCU could very well have an elite defense again this year. But like I said, it's so hard to gauge them right now.
They're a 2.5-point favorite. So obviously there's something that Vegas sees about TCU that...
It might be a lack of belief in Purdue more than anything else. They were a 1-point favorite on Vandy.
And they beat them.
You blow an 18-point lead to Nevada, the doubt is going to happen. And I'm sure people still remember the bowl game against Auburn.
Yeah, that's going to resonate in people's minds pretty thoroughly. Moving on to out west, Hawaii plays their third Pac-12 team in a row. They travel to Washington, who after dropping last week's game to Cal is 23rd in the country. They're 1-1, but despite that, a 21.5-point favorite over Hawaii.
Fun fact, Hawaii has more Pac-12 wins this year than Oregon State does the last 2 years.
Let that sink in.
I think Washington handles them.
I do too. I think defensively Washington's... it's not like they were bad against Cal, it's just they couldn't score.
Yeah, no, in the weird extenuating circumstances of that game, I think Washington's very talented. I think Jacob Eason is going to throw for quite a few yards because Hawaii's defense is not very good.
Pretty porous.
They allow a lot of yards, and they kind of subscribe to the bend but don't break philosophy out of necessity. And they did that to a T against Oregon State and almost lost in the game against Arizona. But this would be a program definer for Nick Rolovich at Hawaii if he can knock off all 3 Pac-12 teams on his schedule.
It's a nice resume booster if he wants to go elsewhere.
Yeah. I don't think he would, though. He quarterback there, and he's relatively young.
Yeah, and plus you're in Hawaii.
Yeah.
So
I like Washington. Maybe not to cover here, but I don't think it's going to be very intense of a game.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be in doubt at any point. And the final game, the late night game on ESPN, Texas Tech goes to Arizona. The over-under is 77 for this game, but you don't think that Arizona is going to be able to score on this kind of reinvigorated Texas Tech defense that they've shown for the first 2 weeks of the season.
I think they'll be able to score. It's just 77's a lot of points. And Texas Tech is running maybe even more of a grinded-out air raid than Kingsbury was. Bowman, his first game, is 40 of 53 for 436. And then last week he was 30 of 45 for only 260 against UTEP. They scored 45 and 38 points, respectively, in those games. Arizona hung up 65 on an FCF school last week. It could go over, but I do think this Texas Tech defense is a little better than we're used to seeing. And they both kind of play possession a little bit. They rack up points. But Texas Tech, if they can move the ball, will grind some drives out. I'm thinking 38-31, somewhere in there. I'm not sure who that goes to, though. I honestly am like almost hesitant to make a pick on this game.
I mean, it's basically a pick 'em, 2.5 points in Texas Tech's favor for the line.
I'm going to take Texas Tech. Arizona's home field advantage is null. No one shows up to their games. So that doesn't matter. I think Alan Bowman's going to have himself a game.
And Khalil Tate's always going to put up numbers.
I mean Arizona, actually, they allowed like 436 passing yards to Hawaii. And I forget the guy's name. Case Cookus for Northern Arizona last week broke 302. So I see that trend continuing here.
Over-under on Bowman's yards totals.
350.
Yeah, I just like you said, they're more of a grinded-out air right now. They're going to try to run the ball a little bit more than...
Not necessarily. They've been using their passing as their running game so far. I mean, 30 completions for 260. That's old school area.
Yeah.
That's when like Leach was in his first year.
You're running
with Kingsbury.
You're running like 3 and 4 yard hitches.
Yeah, I mean Kingsbury back then had a few games where he was like 37 of 50 for 255. Like really, really slow down the field. And they got killed actually quite a bit because of that, but that's neither here nor there.
That's beside the point. But I think Texas Tech will win, but it's going to be tight. So that's basically it for games this week. It's kind of a lackluster slate as a whole. I mean, there's some maybe some hidden gems.
Yeah,
some of these
we wouldn't even be picking on an ordinary week.
Yeah, like, I don't think Air Force and Colorado would typically make a list if it wasn't for what else is this week. So that'll wrap it up here on the 4th episode of the Bird and the Bear podcast. So you can keep track of Cameron's hot takes. Right now he's 0 for 1. We touched on that earlier. So this week it's Indiana stays within 10 of Ohio State. And we'll see if Cameron can break to 500 going into next week. So for Cameron Carriglio, I'm Michael Knauff saying goodnight, and we'll see you next week here on The Bird and the Bear. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at The Bird and the Bear, CFB, on YouTube for this episode and all previous episodes covering the college football season. See you next time.